Hi everyone, welcome to my channel where I talk about movies, including recent Blu-ray releases here in spring of 2023. And I've got a very unusual entry onto my channel because I'm going to be talking about silent films. And this is a recent release from a company called Under Crank Productions. These are two silent films from 1922, Back Pay in the Valley of Silent Men, and they were directed by Frank Borzage. Now, I have never talked about silent films. I've done almost 400 videos on my channel, but I've never, and I've covered every other decade, but I've never covered the 1920s. I'm not a big, I don't have much knowledge of silent films other than Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton. I've seen all their films and many of them several times. Dramas, The Woman of Paris by Chaplin, Sunrise, a couple of others, but that's about it. So, but what drew me to this particular title was because it was directed by Frank Borzage. And 2 years ago, first year I had a YouTube channel, I did a series on Frank Borzage movies. At one point in film history, he was considered one of the great directors of all time. He's making a comeback, and I'm doing my best to accelerate that comeback because I love Frank Borzage movies. And I also, as part of that series, I read probably the only book on Borzage and his movies written by Hervé Dumont, which is just a fantastic, biography, and I mean, in great detail, including these two films are discussed in this book. Before I get to the two movies, I want to talk a little bit, just briefly, about Under Crank Productions, which I had never heard of before. So both of these films are restorations by the Library of Congress, but Under Crank Productions is a company. I think the man's name is Tom Modell, who is also a silent film accompanier. He travels around the country playing live scores to silent films. But it's basically a Kickstarter. This is a company of collectors, of avid silent film collectors who want to preserve, who want to bring out these, the way I understand it, Library of Congress restorations onto Blu-ray editions. And we also get, as part of this restoration, or as part of this Blu-ray release, we get scores by Andrew Earl Simpson. Now, let me tell you, these are fantastic scores. I've always been a little bit, I don't particularly like silent film scores in general, the tinkly music in particular, but these two scores that one is on piano, and the other one is on what uses organ music, and they're just absolutely beautiful scores. There's also another element to this release that I found very interesting, is that even though there's no commentary, it's only one 11-minute extra on this film, you can watch the film. You have the option of watching it with a subtitle commentary track, and it's not obtrusive. And it provides you a lot of information about where the films were made. In other words, you're getting a commentary, but it's going to be in subtitles. But it doesn't run all the way through, but it does give you a lot of very interesting information, especially about the locations, because both of these films, made in 1922, were filmed largely on location, not just on location, on some spectacular locations. So both of the films don't look, pristine. They have artifacts, especially the second film. But in the first film is Back Pay, and this is based on a Fannie Hurst story that appeared in Cosmopolitan magazine. Fannie Hurst at that time was an enormously successful writer, and so many movies were made. Imitation of Life. There's just Backstreet. There's just so many films made from her stories, which are basically aimed at a female audience. They're sort of female weepies. Now, Back Pay, as I say, appeared in Cosmopolitan magazine, and Borzage was signed to Cosmopolitan Pictures, which was an offshoot. Both Cosmopolitan and the Pictures were owned by William Randolph Hearst, the inspiration for Charles Foster Kane in Citizen Kane. So the storyline here is of a woman who comes from a small town to the big city. The small town is family values. The big city is the citadel of sin, and she has a boyfriend back home. He wants to marry her. She doesn't. She wants luxury. She wants to get out of this drab small town. So she goes to the big city. She works for a while in a millinery shop, but then she quickly becomes a kept woman of a very rich banker. So she has everything she wants, but she never forgets her boyfriend. Her boyfriend definitely never forgets her. And then World War I comes along, and he's injured in the war, and it's basically a story, as many Borzage movies are, about the redemptive power of love. And back pay refers to the wages of sin, the back pay of the wages of sin. And again, as I mentioned before, locations, they tell you about the different locations. Much of it was filmed in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, which is right along close to the Delaware Water Gap. I don't live too far away from that. And also Hackettstown, New Jersey. So these were East Coast productions. Borzage had been working on the West Coast, but when he signed with Cosmopolitan, he came east to make these films. So Back Pay looks pretty good. I mean, it does have artifacts, but there are some beautiful. Both films, despite the damage to the prints, have been restored so that the clarity is great, the speed, the motion of the actors. It's really gorgeous. And I didn't write the cinematographer's name down, but he was working with Borzage for about 12 different movies. Now, in the second movie, the first movie is 82 minutes. The second movie, Valley of Silent Men. This is only 56 minutes because there's a considerable amount of film that has been lost or damaged. So here the subtitle commentary track really comes in handy because it fills in the gaps of what happened in the meantime. And this is spectacularly filmed in the Canadian Rockies outside of Banff in Alberta, and it's a story of the Northwest Mounted Police, the Rocky and police force, and a mystery story involves it. Is also based on a popular novel by a writer nowadays forgotten, but he wrote a lot of books set here in up in Canada. So there's, like I say, spectacular scenery. A scene on a glacier, a scene on a rapids on a river. In fact, one of the prop men died during the shooting. Borzage was devastated by that, and he hardly ever wanted to do location work ever again. He didn't want to go away from the studio much at all. But the scenery is just absolutely fantastic. And I want to just mention a little bit about the two stars in each of the films in Back Pay. Sina Owen plays the love interest, or the woman who's gone bad, and I always wonder about these names, who were the stars of these movies, and especially in the early part of the silent film era. Whatever happened to them, because their names are just totally forgotten. So Sina Owen, she made a couple talkies movies, but then she retired. Now Matt Moore, who plays the Rocky, who is the love interest in this film, he went on to a long career, I think in the 1960s. But looking over his filmography, he basically played in uncredited performances all along the way in some very famous movies. Now in Valley of the Silent Men, Alma Rubens is the star of the film, and tragically she became addicted to heroin. So within 10 years of the making of Valley of the Stuntmen, she passed away from her heroin addiction. And then Luke Cody, who played the Rocky, he evidently had a bad heart. He, however, was making the transition to silent film, so they both of them died within 10 years of the making of the Valley of Silent Men. So again, this is Borzage in 1922. He had already made Humoresque in 1920, also from a Fannie Hurst story. Now, he got really praised for that. He had been making westerns, but this was his first film. It became an international success, and it was shown in Russia, one of the few silent American films shown in that era in Russia, and Borzage was highly praised for his direction, his very sensitive direction of melodramatic material. I think no matter what the critics would say about the melodrama of these films, everybody points out how good Borzage was in his direction. So after, and he would become even more famous because he was the first winner of the Best Director Academy Award for Seventh Heaven back in I guess the late 20s, and then he would receive a second Academy Award for Bad Girl. He would go on in the 30s to make such great films as History is Made at Night with Jean Arthur and Charles Boyer. This is in the Criterion Collection. And The Mortal Storm with Margaret Sullivan, James Stewart. So Borzage, and like I said, I did a series on Borzage movies, about 8 or 9 of them a couple years ago. I'll link to that playlist for anybody who is interested in Borzage. He is making a comeback. I'm doing my part for the Frank Borzage comeback because he's certainly deserving of attention. He was a really fantastic director. Okay, thanks a lot for everybody who managed to listen. I do appreciate it. Comments are welcome. Take care.